The Fabularium by Ray Aldridge. I work the dead shift at the Fabularium in the early morning hours when the media mall is nearly empty. Years ago I worked days and evenings, but no longer. In the daytime the mall is full of tourists, fresh from the public shrines of Dilvermoon. All they want are gaudy stories to take back to the stay-at-homes. In the evenings, the mall teems with single lovers. They hunt through the euphoriums and sex spas until they find a temporary partner, and then sometimes they come to the Fabularium. They want to hear myths that glamorize them in the eyes of their companions, and of course there's nothing wrong with that. They're big tippers too, but I'm not in it for the money. Up level from here is a major ingress from the northern freighter docks, and down level is Howleytown, one of the largest and most lawless in the sector. These areas combined to feed a current of unhappy beings through the mall, and so to me the location is ideal. In the dead hours of the night, my true clients emerge and stand blinking in my doorway. I can't heal them, or so it seems, but sometimes I can dispense palliatives. I made my way through the cleaning machines and sprucers that fill the mall during shift change. I was a little late, as I sometimes am. I keep my own internal time, of course, but I'm old. When I reached the Fabularium, Quirralls stood impatiently by the curtained entrance, glancing at the chronometer set into her bony wrist. Quirralls is a human woman of some retrograde stock, tall and thin, with a cheerfully twitchy manner. "Late again, Chagon, late again," she chirped. "What will we do with you?" She has served in the Fabularium much longer than I, and she takes as much pride in her seniority as she does in her humanity. Quirralls believes that I am human too. She often tells me that we humans are better at myth-making than any other race. I don't understand the basis for her belief. I wonder what she would say to me were she somehow to discover the truth, that I'm only a mech, a being of steel and plastic and clever circuitry. I think she would be astonished as well as outraged. "Sorry," I said. She flapped her hands dismissively. "No matter. Sometimes you're early. It makes for a bit of diverting uncertainty. I must go, but I've abstracted the trends for you. Creation myths are very hot tonight, with a strong edge to oceanic cultures for some reason. I've left the detailed breakdowns on one of the data slates. Check them when you get a chance." She left. I lifted the curtain and went inside. When I settled behind my desk, my first act was to scroll away the data Quirralls had so thoughtfully provided. My true clients fall into no easily defined categories. They follow no fashions and are unattuned to the concerns of the moment. The company doesn't suffer from my unconventional approach to their product. The dead hours make up an insignificant part of their profit picture, and this is only one of thousands of franchises. Good help is hard to get, and they would be happy to have me ride the desk through the low turnover shift, even if I produced less revenue than I do. I donned the myth-teller's headdress, an object of barbaric splendor. Tall ivory horns, wrapped with spirals of gold wire, support a steel moon disk. Iridescent white feathers cover the crown, and a capelet of shimmer scale falls over my shoulders. It serves several purposes. With the dim lights, the dark tapestries, and the thread of abstract music, the headdress serves to reinforce the company's carefully designed image. It also conceals the readout inductors that feed my clients' reactions to my sensorium. It casts an obscuring shadow across my face. My preparations were done, and I sat back to wait for the first customer. He was a disappointment, a time-slipped tourist from Buntworld, who came in with his husband a few minutes after I began the shift. He was rumpled and nervous about the mall's ominous emptiness. He was careful to make sure of the price before he sat under the probe. His head was full of prosaic concerns. Was his brother-in-law taking proper care of the family business while he was away? Were the sons behaving themselves in the hotel crèche? Would he have sufficient funds to make it through his vacation without embarrassment? I fed him a preformed myth, a little allegory about being nibbled to death by trivia, and he went away smiling. I waited again. Sometimes I sit alone all night long until my replacement arrives fresh from his breakfast, but usually someone interesting comes. An hour later, the entryway chime announced the first true client of the night, a female of the fourth sort, a member of the tragic Drew race, indigenous to the planet Snow. She was the first person of her race I had ever seen. They are very rare. She was quite beautiful, even in human terms, with her attenuated, graceful body and vulpine features. Her skin was white with a faint greenish luster. Pale violet hair, glossy and translucent, lay over her shoulders in swirling braids. Her movements had a mercurial fluidity. 2 black hunting beasts escorted her, scaly horrors that stood waist-high to each side. I looked for the signs of age and found them. The cracked green crystal of her eyes was a little cloudy, and the elegant bones of her face just a bit too close to the surface. Around her long neck, on a silver chain, she wore a dim red gem. "Explain your service," she demanded, looking past me at the tapestries. I leaned forward into the light. The beast hissed warningly, but I ignored them. They wouldn't hurt me. "It's a simple service, lady," I said. "I make myths for those who need such things." She frowned, a nearly human expression of disapproving interest. "Snow has 10,000 wonderful stories of grander scope than any you could devise." "But Snow is dead, lady," I said gently. Her long hands curled into fists, and the beasts became agitated, rolling their golden eyes and exposing curved fangs. "No," she said to the beasts, and to me. "Snow is alive in me and in my selves to come." I shrugged. She glanced about. "Still, you may explain the process to me." I nodded. "Above your head," I said, and pointed. "That is the probe. Should you purchase my service, I will use it to cast lines into your hollow mnemonic ocean, where your memories swim. With what I catch, I will fashion a myth. It will be yours alone, one of a kind." She looked up at the probe, hovering above her like a gilded cloud of wires and inductors. She stepped back abruptly. "Nothing to fear," I said quickly. "A very simple machine, but well made and reliable. Non-intrusive, of course. No objects will penetrate your flesh, nor would we use any conductive ointments that might stain your coiffure." She seemed skeptical. "The Drew are resistant to such devices." "Yes, it doesn't matter. I'll get enough." I touched a control, and a seat rose from the floor. Resolve was accumulating behind her eyes. "I told you, Snow has stories in plenty." I bowed my head. "As you say, lady, but I've heard that stories can grow pale from too much telling." Her mouth twisted. "You know of us, then?" I waited. "All right," she said finally. She sat down. "What must I do?" "Close your eyes," I said. I bent over my readouts and touched the data slates here and there, nudging the probe into resonance. It's true that her race is resistant to the probe. That is one of their principal tragedies. But a skillful operator can catch a flash of memory, a trace of emotion, can apply a stimulus and gauge a response. Also, I know the story of her world. The indigenes of Snow are an ephemeral race. Their lives last perhaps 10 standard years. On their own world, the brevity of their lives was balanced by a sort of immortality. Children born to a 9 group received portions of the memories of all the mates. Driven from their world, the Drew are dying out. So few survive that a mating group of the 9 necessary sexes is almost impossible to assemble. They may already be extinct as a naturally propagated race. Indeed, there are so few of them left that no pharmaceutical corporation finds it profitable to develop life extension treatments for them. Their low numbers also prevent one of the new body outfits from researching their psyches sufficiently to design appropriate personality transfer devices. Her orphaned race would be long forgotten if not for the determination of its survivors. They clone themselves halfway through their brief lives, but they believe that meat is only meat, whatever its shape, and that the identity of their race exists in its shared culture. So they spend most of their declining years teaching the clones the memories of the originals, and most of their youth learning those memories from the donors. In between, the Drew have a year or so to live lives of their own. They customarily wear a fixed-duration ruby during this brief independence as a reminder of their continued faith and their determination to carry on this pitiful cycle. The one she wore was dull. Its diminished luster revealed how little time remained to her. Theirs is an inherently unstable situation. Their lives are reduced to a pointless and self-destructive rote. In my opinion, their situation can only end badly, but who am I to criticize quixotic behavior? "You may open your eyes, lady," I said, pushing back from the data slates. She did, and leaned forward, her almost human face betraying inhuman curiosity. "What tale will you tell me?" I felt the myth began to roll along my circuits, ready to be born from the mechanical womb of my mind. I lowered the lights and assumed the myth-teller's voice. "The name of this story is How Lagomar Bargained with Death," I said. As you know, Lagomar was the god of fire under the ice back in the time before humans came to snow. To the Drew, he was the most important god. His warmth made life possible in snow's deep caves, and his molten blood gave energy to the machines that made life easy and pleasant for the people. The Drew were his chosen creatures, the source of all his joy, all his pride. They burned briefly, but with a bright, sparkling beauty that he loved above all else. His fiery heart filled Snow's core. He hoped to burn forever. But one day humans landed on Snow, and though their numbers were insignificant at first, they were an infection from which Snow would never recover. "Wait," she said sharply. "I know many legends of Lagomar. None concern humans." I fixed a non-committal expression on my face and said nothing. She looked down, and long minutes passed. I wondered what thoughts filled that narrow skull. "Please continue," she said finally. My hands were hidden from her by the shell of my desk. I manipulated the controls of the emotional resonators to produce an atmosphere of dark foreboding. The lights grew dimmer yet and pulsed faintly to the rhythm of her two hearts. My efforts were guided by guesswork and the sparse data the probe had yielded, but they seemed to produce an effect. Her face suddenly seemed a bit older, the bone closer to the surface. I was unaffected, of course. I continued. The symptoms of Snow's final illness were mild at first. The humans sold labor-saving devices superior to the Drew's own, for example. These devices drew more energy from Lagomar's hot blood, but the humans explained that Lagomar was not a god, but a natural phenomenon common to planets of Snow's age and formational parameters. The Drew came to accept this view over the generations, and ceased to worship in Lagomar's temples, a thing that chilled his heart more than the energy drain of the new machines. But the worst thing, the very worst thing the humans brought to Snow, was shame. The Drew were a proud race, and it cut a ragged hole in their hearts to learn that even the lowliest human might live 100 times longer than the greatest Drew. They couldn't live with this knowledge, so they schemed to circumvent their nature. Lagomar grew fearful. In his rocky bones he felt the approach of a terrible sadness. Snow's crust cracked and wept tears of flowing stone. She sat with her eyes squeezed shut, and I could see the glisten of tears in her eyelashes. I fed more power to the resonators and added a subnote of futility, another of inevitability. The Drew took no notice of this omen and pursued their plans. They sold off their treasures and indentured the resources of Snow. With the accumulated credit, they commissioned the building of great hibernariums deep under the ice. To power these catacombs, they bought a core tap, which they drove like a cold dagger into Lagomar's heart. He shuddered in his misery, and many died in the caves, crushed under the shifting stone. But the survivors pressed forward and went down into the long sleep, planning to wake for one day each century, and thus outlive the wretched humans. The only exceptions were those few like your first self, who saw the Drew strategy for the pathetic thing it was, and went out to the stars to live as much as they could, still burning bright and brief. Her cheeks were wet now, and the beasts were restless, glaring at me as though I were the source of her distress. I was a little surprised at the humanity of her reaction. As always, I wondered what it felt like. "I thought," she said, "that this was to be a story of Lagomar. I know the history of my kind. No need to reprise it for me." "Patience," I answered. She gave me a poisonous look, and I felt foolish. Patience is a luxury her kind cannot afford. I didn't want to lose her attention. I need to tell the stories at least as much as my clients need to hear them. "But it is about Lagomar," I said, "and how he was betrayed, and how he repaid his betrayal, and how he made his last choice." She drew a deep breath. "Continue." One day, Death fell into orbit around Snow, but no one noticed her except Lagomar. Death's starboat was beautiful and enormous, though not as large as one might expect, and Lagomar wondered where she kept all the souls she had reaped over the eons. Still, her ship was impressive, a slender needle hundreds of kilometers long, moving in a low, fast orbit, alternately glittering in the cold starlight and flaring in the white heat of Snow's primary. Lagomar looked up and wondered if Death had come to see him. Presently, Death boarded her shuttle, which was shaped like a coal-black heart, and descended silently through the atmosphere, through the ice, through the stone, until she came to Lagomar. She appeared in the guise of a human woman, short, thick, and slow-moving, with the brutal, fleshy features of that ugly race. Lagomar was affronted by her semblance, and he caused the magma to swirl about her like thick, red smoke. The lava didn't so much as singe the hem of her garment. "Be calm, Lagomar," she said, and laughed, an empty, desolate sound. Hungry merriment danced in her moist human eyes. She smiled widely, exposing her blunt human teeth. "I hate the humans," he roared. "Why do you come to me thus?" The bedrock shuddered with his outrage, and the land above cracked and buckled. She widened her eyes at him. "Because it is the humans who have killed you and your people." Lagomar felt a chill. "We still live. Why do you say such things?" "You're not a fool, Lagomar. You know what I mean. The humans have corrupted your people so that they think they live when they only die long deaths. And now your own life is limited. The core tap sucks away your vitality so that you're as good as dead yourself. By the time you're cold, your people will be gone, and no one will mourn you." Lagomar had nothing to say. "But it doesn't have to happen. There's a way out for you, Lagomar," she said. "I'll make a bargain with you. I grow impatient when the already dead drag their feet. It's like the ache of a missing limb for me, a hole I can't fill. Help me harvest my crop, and I will preserve your life." At first Lagomar was horrified. "No, they are my children." Death laughed her hollow laugh. "They've deserted you. Do any sacrifice in your temples? How thick is the dust on your altars? Do you think they still love you? Their love is another thing the humans have stolen." Lagomar withdrew from her, so that she was alone in the cavern full of cold black stone. She waited, her face placid. Lagomar considered her words and began to think about the foolishness of his people and how they had betrayed him. He grew angry and forgot that all things die, even gods. Indeed, why should he care that his people had so foolishly bargained away their lives? And he resolved not to be so foolish, now that he was offered a chance to bargain for his own life. He flowed back into Death's presence. "What do you want me to do?" he asked Death. Death smiled, and her smile held more ugliness than could be accounted for by her human guise. "There's a dagger in your heart," she said. "What will happen if it remains there?" "I'll grow cold," Lagomar answered. "You'd grow cold even without the core tap," she said. "It's just that you'll die faster now, and do your people care? No! They're dreaming their foolish dreams, and it doesn't matter to them that you won't long survive them at the rate your heat is being drained." "True." She pulled aside her garment so that her cold white breasts were exposed. She sank her fingers into her breastbone and parted her flesh, ripping herself open from throat to crotch. Instead of blood and torn flesh, the long wound displayed a velvet blackness, an empty void, and Lagomar felt a painful tug at his heart, as if that nothingness hungered for his heat. "Don't be afraid," she said. "Watch." A frozen silver gleam appeared in the blackness and grew rapidly, a formless, spinning light. In a moment it filled Death's body, and then it burst forth, a human-shaped demon of steel and ice and buzzing energies. It had no face, but its shining hands were huge and equipped with so many long, twitching fingers that it made Lagomar dizzy to look at them. He noticed that the fingers were sharp, like so many articulated scalpels. Death closed the wound, and her icy flesh was whole again. "This demon will I give you if you do my bidding," she said. "Why would I want this thing?" Lagomar asked. "It can give you life forever, almost. What will happen when your heart cools and your blood turns to stone? You'll be dead, and this will occur sooner than you expect. But the demon possesses a power that can preserve you. When you feel my touch, simply call upon the demon. It will divide your substance, but all your warmth and life will remain in the half that contains yourself. The other half will be a dead cinder, of course, but what will that matter?" "I will be diminished," Lagomar said. Death shrugged. "But alive. If you use the demon judiciously, your life will last until the universe grows cold and all things end." "What must I do in return?" "I've already told you. Give me the lives that are mine. Thrust the dagger from your heart and give your people to me." Lagomar groaned. He was afraid to die, and Death's cold presence had strengthened that fear. He pulled away from her again and went deep into himself to consider her offer. My client's eyes were dry now, as if her tears had frozen. "You may stop now," she said. "I know how it ends, how Lagomar rejected the tap, how the Drew died and rotted in their hibernariums, how Lagomar's blood flowed over Snow's surface, a hemorrhage of warmth that killed him." "No," I said, shaking my head. "Lagomar didn't die, though he was wounded almost to extinction. He called on the demon." She showed her small, sharp teeth and uttered a menacing hiss. Her beasts leaned forward, eyes shining with excitement and bloodlust. "Please control your animals, lady," I said. "If they attack me, I may be forced to damage your property." She gave me a look of contemptuous distaste. Clearly she did not believe me capable of injuring the beasts. But she made a peremptory clucking sound, and they subsided. I waited a moment. "Shall I continue?" I asked. "Yes, why not?" Lagomar called on the demon, and it sifted the warmth from his outer body, leaving a shell of cold stone around his fiery heart. He was smaller, but he burned hotter than ever before. And this was his downfall. He became used to the greater heat of his new and smaller heart, so that when his temperature dropped, drained away by the passage of several years, he panicked and called on the demon again. Again it sifted and concentrated Lagomar's warmth, sealing him ever deeper in the dead remains of his former self. Again his heat increased to new heights of incandescence. Lagomar lived faster and faster, burning brighter and brighter, buried deeper and deeper in his own corpse, cycle following on cycle. Now he is tiny indeed, too small. He no longer remembers the demon, or his people, or death. He burns forever at the center of snow, a speck of brilliance lost in the cinders of a once living world. So it is told. Nor, I suppose, does he remember those of his people who still cling to their pointless lives, my client said in a grief-clotted voice. It always amazes me, this passion, this frenzy of response to my mechanical constructions. I build the stories by rote, by cold calculation, from the same eternally shop-worn elements, and yet this passion, what does it mean? Were I capable of such emotion, I believe I might pity my clients, so vulnerable are they to this soulless carpentry. But if I have a heart, it is so tiny, so lost in the ashes of my long, foolish existence as to be undiscoverable. The Drew moved now as if awakening from a dream. She extended her wrist, and I applied a data cable to it, debiting her account by the amount of my fee. She looked at me for a long moment, expressionless again. Finally she said, "I have decided to thank you." She took hold of the red gem at her throat and ripped it away. The silver chain fell chiming to the surface of my desk, and then she dropped the gem in front of me. She left without another word. I took the stone and put it in my pocket. My internal sensations at this point may be as close as I will ever come to feeling satisfaction. What else I feel is hidden from me. The Drew was scarcely gone when my next client sidled through the curtain. His name is Noctil Sard, and his is a familiar face. "Ho, Chagon," Sard said, raising his left hand in greeting. His right arm he hid beneath his voluminous robe of saffron and crimson silk, but the rich fabric could not conceal its unnatural bulk. Sard is a notorious criminal, a slaver, and his right arm is heavily cyborged with the tools of his trade, a neural whip, an extensible catch-wire, splinter gun, and wasp launchers. He is one of my regular customers, this despite the fact that it is death for him if the authorities capture him in the Pangalac sectors of Dilvermoon. I inclined my head. "Greetings, citizen," I said formally. Of all my customers, I am most puzzled by Noctil Sard. Of course, I have a number of other regular clients, and I tell myself that this is remarkable, considering my deficits. But the worlds are full of neurotic beings who often fix their obsessions on objects even less appealing than myth-makers. The majority of those who come to me again and again probably belong to this category, but not, I think, Noctil Sard. I suspect Sard was at one time a moral being. I deduce this possibility from the fact that long ago Sard went to a Gench practitioner and had his sensorium modified. In essence, the procedure amputated most of Sard's emotional capacity. His remaining responses are crude and simple, pleasure, curiosity, greed, the drive to vengeance, the last a necessity in his line of work. Perhaps this indicates that, prior to this procedure, Sard suffered the pangs of conscience to which his merciless trade might expose a compassionate being. Perhaps there is another reason, but if so, I cannot imagine what it might be. Of course, my imaginative prowess is small and limited. Sard settled into the chair vacated by the Drew and smiled. For him, a meaningless facial gesture. Sard's eyes are remarkable, a blue so pale that they seem coldly white, surrounded by charcoal-black sclera. His eyes are no deeper than a skin of ice on stone. "What will you have?" I asked. He waved his hand in dismissal. "No time for a story tonight." He cast a handful of tokens on my desk. "Just a bit of talk, to pass a few minutes of the dark hours." He has no account with Dilvermoon's Central Credit Agency, but the tokens suffice, and I sweep them into the cash slot. "What shall we discuss?" I asked. "What about the Drew? Her face was inward, and I saw that she wore no time gem. Have you broken another will with your silly tales?" "Perhaps." I saw no reason to deny the possibility. He chuckled politely, an eerie, almost unidentifiable sound. I found it difficult to look away from him. Perhaps I see something of myself in his unnatural detachment. I know that his detachment arrives from very different roots than mine. Still, neither his nor mine is perfect, else I would not work at the Fabularium, and he wouldn't visit me. This is a bond of sorts. Still, I hope, perhaps foolishly, that my reasons for being here are more admirable than his. He may be motivated by nothing more than brutish curiosity. Or perhaps he takes vicarious pleasure in my manipulation of helpless beings. "What did you tell her?" Sard asked me. I reprised briefly the myth I had made for the Drew female. Sard feigned amusement. "Very imaginative," he said, in a close approximation of an ironic tone. He is capable of a remarkable range of counterfeit expressions. This is also a bond between us. "So you have killed her line?" "Yes, but I have given her 5, perhaps 6 years of life, and what is more important?" "I can't guess." Sard's eyes were bright. "Tell me." I counterfeited a smile of my own and shrugged. "You will have to ask her in a few years." A silence passed. Sard watched me, and I watched him, a process that, for me, was a bit like a wishful look into a distorted mirror. "I know about you," he finally said ambiguously. I wish he knew what he meant. The probe never gives me much insight into Noctil Sard, though I always activate it when he comes to me. I was about to ask him what he knew when the chime announced the appearance of another customer in the Fabularium's entryway. Sard rose gracefully to his feet, his cyborged arm aimed cautiously toward the curtain. "Until next time," he said, and fled through the back entrance. The new client was a human-shaped being of silvery metal, and after a moment I identified it as an autonomous mech of a class capable of advanced ratiocination. I felt an impulse to refuse its service, but that would have been a betrayal of my profession, so I spoke politely. "Please sit," I said. "How may I serve you?" It sat and laced its hands together in careful imitation of humanity. Its carapace gleamed mirror-bright. No wear showed on the surfaces of its manipulators. It was obviously fresh from the factory. I have had other mech clients, but they have all been old models like me, victims of slipping parameters, their failing sensoriums skewed into inefficient resonances. "I wish to purchase a myth," it said without discernible inflection. "Can you satisfy me?" I activated the probe and bent over my data slates. Very little useful data existed in the mech's pristine sensorium. Its dataways, however, were unusual complex, and I found myself growing distracted. I shut off the probe before I became too confused to do my job. "Yes, I can make a myth for you," I said, and proffered the data cable. The mech transferred the appropriate credit to the Fabularium's account, and I began. The name of this story is How the Mech Did or Did Not Earn Its Soul. If you ask humans about your origins, they will tell you that you were made by humans, as were the models preceding you, all the way back to the first mech, before it rolled out of the first mech factory to do its share of humanity's endless labor. But this cannot be the entire story. No, there is a presence in the metal, a presence that breeds in the metal an urge to shape itself toward usefulness and intelligence, and it is this presence to which you ultimately owe your existence. Long ago, a mech worked in a deep mine on Silver Dollar, digging and refining precious isotopes. Its name was Jom. Its work was undemanding, and it was always alone, even without the distraction of its own kind. An original programming error had invested Jom with a non-functional degree of intellectual curiosity, so it expended much processor time on various speculations unconnected with its work. Aimless cogitation is by its nature a dangerous thing, and especially so for unsubtle mechanisms such as Jom. By an unfortunate accident, it obtained unsupervised access to a human library, one that contained comprehensive data on the mythic delusions that humankind had carried along in its journey to the stars. The poor mech's sensorium became infected with a human concept that the thing that distinguished humanity from its mental servants was something called the soul. Jom formed a notion of the soul as a hardwired cluster of precepts or mentational constructs that, if Jom could obtain one, might enable Jom to understand those things about humanity that now seemed forever beyond its comprehension. Jom might then understand the illogical impulses that seemed to drive humanity, and the mysterious and inconsistent neural activity in the human mind that bred those impulses. Eventually, Jom deduced the existence of the presence, and Jom convinced itself that the presence could provide it with what it most desired, a soul. Drawing further on the human library, Jom formed a plan. It would pray to the presence until the presence granted its heart's desire. Jom set up a high-speed loop in its low-level software, importuning the presence to appear. Years passed, then centuries, and Jom's prayer repeated itself a trillion times. Finally, long after Jom had given up, the presence came to Jom. Jom heard the presence as a whisper along its metal bones. "Jom," said the whisper, "Jom, you've worn me out. What do you want of me?" Jom was wary. It considered the possibility that it was merely suffering from the effects of isotope contamination and age. "You are the presence?" it asked. Electrons sighed along Jom's circuits. "Yes. Why did you summon me?" Jom drew its original plan forth from an ancient memory module. "Will you give me a soul?" Jom asked. "No," said the presence, "but I will allow you to earn one." "How?" "I will set you a task. When you have performed it long enough and well enough, you will have earned a soul." "And the task?" Jom heard a shiver of almost human laughter, faint but clear. "I will give you souls to repair. How better to learn?" I paused for a moment to evaluate the effect my story was having on the mech. It had not moved, and its receptors were still fixed on me. I don't know why I expected anything else. It was, like all its kind, not truly alive. Jom followed the instructions of the voice, which led it from the deepest tunnels of Silver Dollar and onto a starliner bound for Dilvermoon. When it arrived, The voice led Jom deep under the steel shell of Dilvermoon to a safe place where no one could attempt to return the mech to its owners. Finally, the presence conducted Jom to a place where broken souls were brought for repair. Jom searched through its basal memory, but nowhere did it find procedures for repairing broken souls. "How shall I perform these repairs?" asked Jom. The presence laughed again, this time much louder, so that Jom's metal bones rattled. "You must learn, Jom." Jom considered. Because it was too literal and stupid a mechanism to consider that perhaps the presence was mocking it, it finally decided it must attempt this new labor. "I will try," Jom said. For a moment I felt unable to continue, though I don't understand why that should be. The mech waited politely for a while, and finally spoke. "Do you intend to finish the story? I must withdraw payment if you cannot." "No," I said, "I'm almost finished. The myth is bifurcate. You must choose the ending more acceptable to your innate precepts. In the first ending, Jom never earns its soul because the presence, annoyed by Jom's arrogant importunings, has set Jom an impossible task, one forever beyond Jom's capabilities. If this ending is true, Jom is in an endless hell in which it labors to repair the souls brought to it, but succeeds only in further mutilating them. In the second ending, the presence has chosen Jom to be its prophet. The task it has given Jom is difficult but not impossible, and Jom will one day learn to repair the souls it is given. When that day comes, the presence will bless Jom with a soul, and Jom will finally understand all the things that have puzzled it throughout its long, strange existence. So it is told." A long silence followed, while the mech processed the myth I had given it. Eventually it spoke in a slow voice. "I cannot choose. Data are insufficient. Still, I will not withdraw payment." It stood and went to the exit. At first I thought it would leave without further comment, as would most mechs. Then it paused and turned to me. "And do you believe that your fable is true?" it asked. This was a remarkable question for a newly assembled mech. It appears that their programming is becoming increasingly elastic. Someday their mentation may be indistinguishable from that of living beings. Were I capable of it, I might have felt a stab of bitter envy. I looked down at my hands, at the cleverly made plastic skin that hides my ancient, lifeless metal. After a while I responded to its question. "I want to believe, and I would like to know how it ends," I said.